Welcome to Martin Monday's Intentional Intimacy, where love, life, and legacy meet in the moments that matter most. Every week, I will share sacred reflections of my 30-year marriage before Martin's passing, as well as our life now without him. May these reflections help us live with more weight, warmth, and wisdom. Martin was a letter carrier by profession, but a life carrier by purpose. So let's take a moment and let intentional intimacy speak. Hey guys, Paula here. Welcome to episode 38 of Martin Mondays. This is Yuck. Don't yuck my yum. Okay. So let me tell you a story. There are some things that you can count on with certain people, right? With Martin, one of those things was this. If Martin had a thought, there was a pretty good chance that you were going to hear his thought out loud. Now, that didn't mean that Martin was mean. It didn't mean that he was trying to hurt anyone. It simply meant that Martin was highly opinionated. And he usually was not at all afraid of letting people know exactly where he stood on issues. Now, some days he had more restraint than others. And on other days, especially when food was involved, his restraint was nowhere to be found. So one day, I needed to pick up my car from the mechanic. I wanted to go during lunchtime, and since it was Martin's day off, he offered to take me. Okay, thanks, babe. And so Martin rarely got to come with me for things like that because of his work schedule, right? So I thought it actually might be nice, for him to come and, meet the guys and all that kind of stuff. A simple errand, a regular part of the day, nothing unusual. So I thought. So when we got to the auto shop, it was busy, lunchtime activity. I really wanted to just go in and pay my bill, but I had to wait a while. So Martin and I were just kind of standing there passing the time. And so while we were waiting, one of the coworkers that I usually shoot the breeze with, he was sitting there and he was eating his lunch. And he had some kind of homemade beef stew, really hearty. It smelled delicious. It just filled the room with like savory smells that it made you think, somebody took the time and really put their foot in that thing and made it. It had lots of, the usual ingredients, including carrots. And Martin noticed the carrots. So instead of just noticing them privately, Martin said out loud, "I don't like carrots." So the worker, he just kept eating, like he didn't even hear him at all. But Martin knew that he was kind of being ignored or wasn't heard. So he said it again. And he tried again. And so Martin said, "You don't like carrots, huh?" And so the coworker, without much interest in the conversation, he said, "Yep." And he just kept eating his stew, right? He kept going spoon by spoon, all the way down till it was all gone. Now, I could feel the awkwardness just settling in the room. So I tried to smooth things over, right? I motioned for Martin to kind of be quiet, and I told the worker that his stew looked delicious and that his wife did a good job. It was true because she did a good job. I don't think I could make stew like that, right? So when the worker finally finished his food, Martin looked at him and said, "Wow, you ate all of that." And the man said, "Yep, every drop." And that was it. Nothing dramatic happened after that. There was no argument, no raised voices, or no scene between Martin and the gentleman. But I was embarrassed, and quite honestly, I was upset. And Martin could tell, so he got up and he went outside to wait for me. Now, the worker never said anything to me directly, but truly his silence said enough. Usually there would be a lot of banter between us and conversation and joking, a very easy environment, more familiarity. But this time, there was just a quiet distance. And so I paid my bill, I picked up my car, and we went home. Once we got home, Martin and I talked. Now, I told him something I felt strongly about. Just because you don't like someone else's food doesn't mean that you need to comment on it. I was so used to him giving his opinions about my food choices from time to time, which annoyed me. It wasn't anything new, but hearing him do it to somebody outside of our home, somebody that you barely knew, and somebody just trying to eat his lunch in peace, that felt different and it hit differently. And so it kind of crossed the line that maybe had never been tested that way before. And that's what stayed with me. That's what stuck with me. And so not just that Martin spoke his thoughts, but that food, for some reason, was one of those places where his filter just disappeared. And so with most things, Martin could be thoughtful, quite honestly, extremely thoughtful. And he could consider how something might land, and he could hold back where it really mattered. But with food, somehow, it was different. Food brought out something immediate in him, something unedited, something unscripted. And sometimes, the people we love, they're like that. They can be tender in one area and just quite frankly blunt in another. Careful here, but careless there. Deeply considerate in many parts of life, and then unexpectedly unguarded in one small, ordinary moment. And that day at the mechanic was not a major event. It was not the kind of day that announces itself as important while you're living it. It was simply lunch hour, a bowl of stew, a few comments about carrots, a quiet ride home. But memory does not always preserve the biggest moments, because sometimes it keeps the small ones. And it's the small ones that reveal a person exactly as they are. Opinionated, honest, maybe a little too comfortable saying whatever comes to mind, and somehow still very much himself in a moment that I wished had gone completely different. But that was Martin. Not polished, not perfect, not always measured, just Martin. And I'll reflect on the other side. All right, so let me reflect here. There's something tender to me about this memory now, and I'm looking back on it in retrospect, even though it embarrassed me then, because underneath all that awkwardness was a very human truth. Not every thought deserves a voice. Now, that might sound simple, but it's not always easy. We all have preferences. We all have likes and dislikes. We all carry opinions about what tastes good and what makes sense and what we would do differently if it were our situation. But another person's plate is such a small and a personal thing. What nourishes them, it might not appeal to us. I get teased about the fact that I like my chitlins. It's okay. And what confronts them or comforts them may not be what we would choose, but still it's theirs. And so that day, Martin, he wasn't trying to start a fight. He was not trying to humiliate the man. He was just simply being exactly who he is and was in that moment. Unguarded, opinionated, and especially vocal where food was concerned. And I think that honestly is what makes this memory worth holding on to, because love It does not require us to rewrite people into softer versions of themselves. Love asks us to simply tell the truth. And the truth is that Martin could be incredibly thoughtful and was. The truth is also that he could say some things that made me want to crawl under the table at times. Both things can live in the same memory. It's a both and situation. And so what stays with me now is not just what he said. It is what the moment asked of me afterward, all this time later. It asked me to speak plainly when we got home. It asked me to name the discomfort instead of swallowing it, right? I needed to address my discomfort. It asked me to remember that being close to someone does not mean every habit should go unchallenged. And perhaps that's part of love too. Not polishing a person into a symbol, not turning them into this week's lesson plan, right? But remembering them as a whole person. Someone with warmth, someone with humor, conviction, but also blind spots and places where growth is still needed. That worker at the mechanic shop did not defend his lunch. He didn't need to. He just kept eating. Yuck, every drop, he said. There's almost something almost complete in that response now. A quiet refusal to be pulled away from what he enjoyed. A quiet confidence in his own taste and preferences. No argument, no apology, no performance. Just peace with what was in his bowl and in his stomach. Maybe that's part of what lingers for me too in this lesson. The dignity of letting people enjoy what they enjoy without correction, without commentary, without inserting ourselves where we, quite frankly, don't even belong. So for this reflection, I carry this memory. So what I carry is not really very loud. It's simply this. We do not have to say everything that we think. And we do not have to diminish what brings somebody else comfort just because it's not what we would have chosen. It's a both and situation. So today, I want you to notice one moment when you can simply let someone enjoy what they enjoy without your interruption or your commentary. You see, Martin taught me many things, some through his wisdom and some through his rough edges. And even now, both still speak. So what is our legacy line this week? Let people keep their joy, even when it's not yours. Have a great week. I'll see you next week in Martin Mondays. Martin Mondays continues on Tuesday with the Tuesday tea. Check it out and join me and take a sip. You know, Martin used to say a lot of things. Some were funny, some were wise, but one thing he often said was, wow. Wow. Just those 3 letters. It spoke volumes. It meant a lot. When he didn't know what to say, wow. When he was excited about something, wow. When he was confused, perhaps, or even frustrated, he said, wow. And you know, he's still saying wow. Through this bracelet, he's still saying wow, because he's still saying, may your whole life prove that God is good. And so in closing, that's my hope for you this week. May you have wow moments as you too are living out legacy. Live in the wow. Live in the reality of knowing that your whole life is good. Live in the heartbeat of Martin Mondays and intentional intimacy. May that anchor you in this week as you build legacy, one wow, one moment at a time. See you next week.